Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Hanford, and my wife, Danae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. Today on the podcast, we have Michael Sherlock. She is the CEO of Sherlock Enterprises, LLC. In her Philadelphia-based training organization, it provides corporations and business leaders with engaging presentations and actionable strategies on leadership, employee development, customer experience, and sales transformation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Doesn't my introduction sound fabulous?
It's because I was reading it is what it was.
I trained him well.
You did.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you. Love you.
We want you to just kind of get started and tell us and our listeners where you are right now as an entrepreneur.
It's a great question. I love the format of what you guys are talking about because, although I know I'm an entrepreneur, I don't know that I always use that term. But it's so important, I think, to consider what it takes to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And I know I am because this is the fourth business or fourth company that I have started and run. I have had more ideas in my head about 1,000 things, so anybody listening probably feels the same way, but it's really for me about, at this point, taking my speaking and training business, as well as the writing of my books, to a level that I never thought possible before. And that is on a truly global scale to reach people in all different mediums and help them to look at the concepts of leadership, sales, and the customer experience.
So I want you to first talk about a tough decision that didn't go so well. You had this tough decision come across your plate. You made the decision and it just didn't turn out the way you'd expected. I want you to dive through some of the lessons you learned through that tough decision as well.
So we have about 3 hours to cover these, right? There's so many, but as I was thinking about this, probably the first one was with my very first company that I started in my mid-20s, and kind of similar to what I'm doing now, although I didn't have a concept of writing a book then. But I was doing speaking and training, and what I realize now when I look back, because my tough decision was the day I had to say, I have to let this baby go so I go back and get a job. And it was because I didn't have the resources or the expanded opportunity to know people to help support my business to take me through the initial startup phase long enough to get to the point where I had a paycheck. And I think now about that lesson learned about, not every entrepreneur has to have, a year's worth of income in order to start their business. I mean, the world has many more opportunities now. But at that point in time, I think I magically thought at such a young age that, people love to hear me speak. They love to have my training. So therefore, the money is just going to fly. And the toughest decision was looking in the mirror and saying, you can't sustain this. You have a young son. It's not time. Your worldview is too small right now, meaning I lived in a small corner of the U.S. and I only saw my reach as that small corner of the U.S. And you have to let this go until you're ready. And it wasn't like you have to let this go and your dream's going to die. But I remember having to say, I can't do this right now. I'm not prepared for it. And it was really tough, but it was the smartest thing I could have done at that point in time.
And what are some of the lessons that you have learned through that particular decision?
One was about having enough working capital. So with whatever business, or entrepreneurial focus you have, what's it going to take to get you through startup? Whether that is, just enough income to make it. Do you need to have investors? Really plotting that out before the first step rather than jumping in. And I jumped in. I was exhausted from my job. I thought this is going to be great. It's going to be, all rainbows and unicorns, which is one of my favorite sayings. And it was really about saying, no, you have to approach this. Just because you have an entrepreneurial mindset doesn't mean you can't approach this and shouldn't approach it just like any other business objective. So that was the toughest one that I had to learn, was prepare for it. But it was the smartest thing that I ever had to learn as well.
Well, I think that's one of the toughest decisions to make when you're starting a business is how much money do you really need? You can create the business plan, you can create things out, and plan things out. But, I'd probably say 9 times out of 10, when we plan to spend $100,000 building a business, many times it's going to take about 20 to 30% more than that.
Exactly.
So whatever number you come up with, add an additional 20 or 30% to have that additional buffer is always a good idea.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you not only run the risk of having to make the decision I made then, but you also run the risk of having to cut corners in other areas, which might be very critical for the business development. And, really being able to tackle it and saying, I know what it's going to cost. I know it's a lot of money, whatever a lot of money. And some people that might be $1,000. Somebody else, it might be $1 million. But I'm going to plan ahead and make sure I have it so my working capital is enough for me to make the right decisions to move the business forward.
So let's shift to a different tough decision that you had, that you made the decision and it turned out really well, and some of the lessons you learned through that one.
Well, I think my podcast would be an example of that. So I started my Shock Your Potential podcast back in January, just really with the intention of having it be a different way for people to hear me as a speaker. Because, my original goal was do more speaking, continue to be able to have fun writing my books and, travel around the world and be, flown on first class wherever I go, right? So the podcast started out with that idea, but I found that not only was it so fun, but the reception of things has been so great that it sparked off other ancillary parts of my business. And so where I never really even thought about monetizing my podcast, now I am preparing to launch several different components of it that are monetized, that are going to be revenue sources that I had no idea. But because I was following just my passion and figuring this is another way to grow my business, and because my awareness was open, I have found other ways to have income sources. And as we all know as entrepreneurs, the key is not to have one income source. You need to have multiple income channels. That way, if one of them falters, you have multiple points of failure before the whole thing collapses. And so some of them, it's just the awareness of saying, oh my gosh, that one idea has sparked other revenue opportunities, as well as other ways to sustain my business.
So you actually saw an opportunity to create this podcast as maybe some way to promote yourself as a speaker to get more speaking engagements. But what it did was it created almost like another business on top of your existing business to create an additional, revenue stream.
Absolutely. And, it's really fun to see it coming together because now I'm adding people to my team to actually develop some of these programs to fruition because I'm great at the idea. And then I'm like, okay, somebody else make this happen because I have another idea brewing. So now I'm pulling these amazing people to me and they're taking my ideas and saying, oh, not only can we do this, but we could do X, Y, Z. I'm like, oh my God, go for it. Let's do it.
Where are you monetizing your podcast now?
So I have not yet. I'm still in the building phase of it, but I will be monetizing in terms of advertising through the actual podcast, advertising on the website for the podcast. But then I'm going to have a number of series of programs where the guests that I have are going to be within. So let me give you an example. I'm working on a wine lovers series. So even though my podcast is based on examples of excellence in leadership, sales, and customer experiences, I'm going to have a wine lovers series within that podcast. So I'll still have my regular guests, but in these wine lovers series, I'm going to be interviewing on site at a number of wineries. And I'm going to be, this is really tough. I'm going to have to drink wine with the winemakers. I'm sacrificing myself for this one. But I'm hearing their stories of their business and why they started it and what they've learned from it and what their concept of experience is. And so in that, then when they are my guests, they are then having a special for my guests to be able to buy a wine, whether it's a 2-pack, a 6-pack, or a 12-pack of their wine. And then I'm earning a commission on that, basically. So there's no risk to my guest. There's no risk to me, but there's a great upsell opportunity to have people be able to have expanded opportunity, but I also have another revenue source.
So, Michael, what have you learned in your experience as an entrepreneur about the strategies that you use to make difficult decisions?
Let's see, that's hard to combine just kind of one answer. And I don't know if it's all just because of being an entrepreneur, but I have been a VP of sales for a couple of very large medical device companies where I've had hundreds and hundreds of people that reported to me. I was responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars coming in and going out. And many decisions I had to make there were tougher than I had to make as an entrepreneur because you have different large-scale business objectives when you're working with $100 million rather than $1 million. And because of that, I think I learned a little bit more. I'm a very emotional person. I'm a very personally connected individual. I like to know people, but I had to learn a different level of buffering of my emotion versus the business. And when I had my very first business that I was alluding to, I was so emotionally wrapped up in that business that I couldn't separate it from me. And I know that now I need something to be able to exist beyond me because what I'm trying to build with my company here is something that I could sell or something that somebody might, want to take on or, maybe my son might want to carry it on one day. So it's not about me anymore. It's about what I want to create and develop. And I think it's that kind of emotional separateness that I found in the larger business world, finally, that I was able to bring back to this last fruition and say, okay, let's take those same applications, let's put them into play here, have all the fun with it you want, look at it through the critical business eye, but take some of that emotion out of it. Doesn't mean I am not emotional, but make this not about me, make this about something bigger than me.
I like your perspective on that, because I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with.
Yes.
Because most often, it is something that is really close to them that they develop a business out of. And then it's hard to separate. Dan and I've talked about this multiple times before, but it's like when you get ready to sell one of your businesses, it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to sell it. Or you have to show me that you're worthy.
It's your baby. Yeah, that's right.
Selling it, selling it to you, because I'm not just going to give this to anybody. When you pour so much energy and time and effort into that, it's hard.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to talk to Michael about some of her favorites as it relates to her businesses.
Hello, this is J.V. Crum III, host of the Conscious Millionaire podcast, with a special announcement for business owners, entrepreneurs, and coaches. Do you want to grow your business to reach 7 figures or even multiple 7 figures? Well, right now, you may have reached 6 figures, but it's easy to get stuck or just not know which steps to take next. Frankly, that can happen to anyone. That's why this month, my special gift to you is the 7-figure formula. Now, it contains the exact steps I've used to make millions and that you need to build your own 7-figure business. Get it now as my gift to you. Go to consciousmillionaire.com/7-figure formula. Again, go to consciousmillionaire.com/7-figure formula.
And we are back. We're going to be talking to Michael about the trifecta, which is a series of quick questions about her favorites. So first off, what is your most favorite technology that you use in business that makes your life easier?
Right now, it is my traveling mic, so that I have started to do podcasts, tapings remotely. And it's very funny, but it plugs right into my cell phone and I can tape a podcast episode from anywhere in the world.
Michael, what is your favorite quote that you have heard that's helped you as an entrepreneur?
Well, this is actually my own quote, so it's going to be a little self-gratifying here, but I always say no one's sense of urgency ever matches my own. And what I mean by that is sometimes people want things from me faster than I'm willing to give it, and sometimes I want things from people faster than they're able or willing to give it, so I have to find a sense of peace in the middle.
And what is a favorite book that you've read that's either helped you in your difficult decisions or in the way you run your business?
2. One is, so I guess I have 2 of them to say. One is called The Outward Mindset, and it's from the Arbinger Institute. It's called About Leadership and Self-Deception. And what I love about it is it forces you to really look in the mirror at the choices that you're making and the decisions you're making, and look at them from other people's perspectives, not just yours. So I think it follows our line. But for the growth and development of my business, I have to say that John Lee Dumas, he puts out this book called The Freedom Journal, and it's to chart, your first 100 days or whatever towards your first major goal. And it's a ridiculously simplistic tool, that you could do all on your own, but the format of having it in this beautifully bound book that forces you to make decisions and write things every day towards how you're going to achieve your goals was the number one, hands down factor that has gotten me farther and faster in my business in the last year and a half than anything else.
So what's the next thing for you right now on your vision or dream board?
Well, the next thing is for me to get my podcast fully monetized, like we were talking about. So that's the big thing on the agenda. But what I should be saying is getting my second book published. So it's almost done. I have to complete it, but I'm very fortunate. I was making a decision about whether or not to self-publish again through a different publishing house, which I'm very happy with. And then yesterday, I just got a call from a major publishing house that has interest in my series of books. So now those are some new decisions on the table.
More tough decisions. I love it.
I know.
Well, how can the listeners reach out to you if they want to contact you or start to follow you?
Yeah, I have 2 websites. So one is shockyourpotential.com, and that's really my business operating name is Shock Your Potential. So shockyourpotential.com and shockyourpotentialpodcast.com.
Great. Well, we'll make sure we put those in the show notes that you can find at toughdecisions.net. I want to thank you so much, Michael, for being on the podcast with us today, and I look forward to having you on a future podcast as you continue to grow as an entrepreneur.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.